Turning victims into victors of sexual abuse, listening to them, giving them the power over their rehabilitation. Tough on crime measures in Bill C-10 is a foundation for creating a start, but what more can be done? Our next guest has spent a lot of time in this area. Joining us now is former police officer Shelly Glover, Member of Parliament, Conservative for St. Boniface, Manitoba. Hi, Shelly.
Hi.
Before we do anything else, I know you want to give us a bit of a primer here on mandatory minimums, because now let me just preface the question with this. The reason the public wants mandatory minimums, as you know, is because they don't trust judgments like the ones that came down this week. So they want to take the power out of the hands of ideological judges and make sure that predators like James get at least a certain amount of time. So I know there's a range, there's always a range, but when you start with a low number, the public can get shafted because the low number could end up as the sentence. Go.
Well, and I appreciate you allowing me to talk about this, because when I spent my 4.5 years in the child abuse unit, and I remind you that I was in the child abuse unit when this case came to us. Sheldon Kennedy was being investigated in Alberta, and we were investigating Graham James' part here in Winnipeg in the unit I was involved in. There is a range that judges have so that they can take into consideration all of the details of the case. Now, sexual assault against victims is horrible for all victims. But the reason there's a range, Charles, is because sexual assault there are different degrees to sexual assaults. As someone who touches another person and does not penetrate the person is a different degree, obviously, that the judges have to take into consideration. So our tough on crime measure was to say there's a minimum, because we were seeing sentences that were not even meeting a minimum threshold for some of those sexual assaults. But there's also a 10-year maximum, and the judges and the justice system have to take into consideration the details and choose an appropriate sentence. I'm very disappointed at this sentence. Frankly, I'm angry about it.
But that's the whole point. I don't want to get into a big argument about the philosophy of mandatory minimum. I just want to say that mandatory minimum can actually be abused when it's used promiscuously, casually, as it could be, even with a predator like James. That's the point.
Well, and you don't want to see abuse in that area at all, but we do provide a range in the criminal code because of the differences in each of these offenses, the potential differences between a sexual assault involving touching and a sexual assault involving penetration.
But you're still counting on the judge to exercise good judgment. That didn't happen this week, and there's nothing about Bill C-210 that would have given the public, would have given the victims more protection.
Well, there are some things in C-10 that protect victims better, particularly when we're talking about enshrining victims' rights to take part in things like conditional release board hearings, things like removing the ability for Graham James to ever get a pardon. That didn't exist under the Liberal system that, frankly, was a mess. I worked with these victims. I saw them crushed. I saw them devastated. This is a good step forward, but we still need for the other part of justice, the courtroom justice, to happen as well. And so that's why I'm disappointed, because we can only do so much at our level creating the criminal code. There's got to be some movement on the other end, and I feel bad for all victims today.
If he's out by Christmas, which is very likely, precisely what is it in the bill that protects victims if he's out by Christmas? The fact that he won't get a pardon? He'll still be out there.
Yes, but remember, the victims now under C-10 will be notified. They get information about behavior of accused people where they didn't get it before. They have the ability to participate in board hearings with regards to conditional releases. That didn't happen before.
I'm talking about new victims, Shelly.
Yes, new victims have all of these rights now. They also have the ability to know they are not going to see their offender, their pedophile offender, their sexual predator do house arrest. That existed in the past. These are very good measures to move it forward. But of course, the system has to work together to protect victims. We've been harping on this for a long time. Opposition continues to vote against it, continues to block and delay. We have victims that potentially will not come forward now because of these kinds of things, and that bothers me.
Would the sky have come crashing down if you'd put 5 years in as the minimum?
Well, the one thing that I think might have happened if we'd have gone that way is you would have seen more delays. The opposition filibustered. The opposition tried to actually close down the House of Commons. They want to take a day off instead of dealing with C-10 and voting on it, which is pathetic.
You've got a majority.
We've got a majority, which is how we had to circumvent, but it took time, Charles. The one disappointment I have as a police officer who expects to go back to police work, who's now doing political work, is the length of time it takes to get any of these bills through. And the partisanship has got to stop. Victims need to come first. This needs to continue to happen. Under this government, it will. Unfortunately, we can't convince the opposition to help us do it in a timely fashion.
But Shelly Glover, if you were in my chair,
yes,
and one day when you're in a police uniform, you
Yes.
will be in my chair, you'd be saying exactly what we've been saying. Because among those people responding positively to what we've been
Yes.
saying are police officers, as you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And police officers today feel, you know, that they want to see more justice. But we cannot put a 5-year minimum for an offense that is a touching offense that did not cause any kind of personal injury compared to an offense, horrific offense like penetration hundreds of times by a sexual predator. The judge still has to have some leeway. But unfortunately, in this case, I'm disappointed with what was decided.
If some creep puts his hands on my 10-year-old girl, 5 years isn't enough. Okay.
And I understand
so I have
that.
no problem looking in the eye, as you know, and saying, no,
I
I have
understand
no
that.
trouble with at least 5 years.
I understand
I'd
that.
have no trouble with 55 years.
But we do have some cases, Charles. I spend a lot of time on this. We've got some cases where we have, you know, a 17-year-old boy who's accused of sexual assault on a 16-year-old girl, and it's not the situation you've described. And 5 years is, we have to look at the range, because 5 years is that appropriate for that case.
You know what the problem is? We're still counting on the judgment of the guy in the robes, or
Yes.
the woman in the robes.
Yes.
That's the real big picture
And I
problem,
want you to
regardless.
understand that, because
Yeah.
our role is to enforce laws that are in the criminal code. Well, it's not the federal government. The police officers enforce these laws that are in the criminal code, and then judges and crowns prosecute.
I want to thank you for pushing the peanut up the hill. All I'm doing is asking on behalf of citizens of our nation, many of them police officers,
Absolutely.
many, many victims, to keep pushing.
And I'm going to keep pushing, you know that. I'm going to,
you.
when I go back, I tend to say I have the tools to do my job properly as a police officer.
Thanks very much.
Absolutely, thanks.
Shelly Glover, Member of Parliament, Conservative, St. Boniface.